welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're jumping into a really fascinating, sometimes controversial topic, Freemasonry.
That's right. It's often surrounded by a lot of mystery and speculation.
Exactly. And we know you want to get a good handle on it quickly, but, thoroughly. So we've structured this deep dive to be engaging and hopefully pretty clear.
We've pulled together some really core sources. We're looking at Albert Pike's Morals and Dogma, which is, quite philosophical.
Deep stuff.
Yeah. Then there's Captain William Morgan's The Mysteries of Freemasonry, more on the historical and ritual side.
Okay.
Charles Leadbeater's The Hidden Life in Freemasonry gets into the sort of inner dimensions. And John Yarker's The Arcane Schools explores those potential ancient links.
Right, so a good mix. Our goal here is really to pull out the key insights from all these different angles, where Freemasonry might have come from, what the symbols really mean, the moral teachings.
Basically giving you a solid foundation without getting totally bogged down. A shortcut to understanding, maybe.
Let's call it that. Okay, so let's get into it. These ancient connections. That seems like a good place to start. Pike and Yarker really lean into this, don't they?
They absolutely do. This idea that Freemasonry isn't just, a few centuries old, but has roots stretching way back into ancient mystery traditions.
Mithras and Egypt.
Exactly. Mithras, Egypt, even the Kabiri, these sort of lesser-known figures from Samothrace.
Okay, tell me about the Mithraic mysteries first. Pike mentions that ladder. The one with 7 rounds.
Ah, yes, the Mithraic ladder. It's a really powerful symbol they discuss, 7 levels, right? Each one representing an ascent through the planetary spheres known back then.
So like Moon, Mercury.
Moon, Mercury, Venus, Sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, yeah. And it wasn't just symbolic. Thinkers like Clemens of Alexandria and Philo-Judaeus apparently saw the temple's 7-branched candlestick in a similar planetary light.
So the number 7 itself was key.
Hugely significant. The idea was the soul descended through these spheres to get here, to the material world. And so, to get back, it had to climb back up that same ladder, sphere by sphere. It's this whole journey of return.
Like Jacob's ladder in the Bible, that kind of idea.
Very similar concept, yeah. It's ascent and descent. Marsilius Ficinus even found 7 degrees in Plotinus's philosophy that mirrored this. So, in the Roman Mithraic mysteries, that ladder was a direct symbol of the soul's journey upward. It's all about transformation.
Wow, okay. And what about those cave celebrations Pike mentions at the equinoxes and solstices?
Right, those were timed to key astronomical points. The caves themselves were symbolic, representing the cosmos almost.
Representing the journey.
Exactly. The soul's descent from the stars, down through those 7 planetary gates, and then the struggle to ascend back up again. Celsus, writing against Christianity but quoted by Origen, described this ladder from earth to heaven with 7 gates and an 8th one at the top for the fixed stars.
Like a spiritual roadmap.
Pretty much, yeah. And Pike connects this ladder idea to the Borsippa pyramid near Babylon too. 7 stages, each a different color.
Reinforcing that step-by-step progression.
And the 7 stages of initiation in the actual Mithraic ceremonies mirrored this ascent. It was all woven together.
Okay, fascinating. So from Persia and Babylon, what about the Kabiri? Yarker flags them as incredibly ancient.
They really seem to be. The Kabiric mysteries of Samothrace lasted a long, long time, well into the Christian era, and they were highly respected for their, perceived purity and age.
And Yarker suggests they might have held on to some very early symbolism, maybe even related to Masonry.
That's the idea. Possibly through the Pelasgians, who were thought to be the original inhabitants of Greece, maybe connected to Egypt. They preserved elements of Chaldean language, too.
Weren't they linked to those huge stone structures, Cyclopean building?
That's the connection people like von Schlegel made, yeah.
Yeah.
These massive walls and structures in Greece and Italy built with enormous irregular blocks fitted together without mortar.
Wow.
The French Institute apparently documented like 150 towns like that. So Yarker definitely connects the Kabiri to this ancient skill in working stone and later metals.
So it's like an early blend of art, religion, maybe even some kind of engineering.
That's exactly how Yarker frames it, a brotherhood uniting art and religion. And Herodotus even said their gods' names came from Egypt, suggesting that kind of cross-pollination.
Right. And then there's Pythagoras. He seems to pop up everywhere when you talk about ancient wisdom.
Oh, absolutely. Pike and Yarker both mention his travels going everywhere to get initiated into different mysteries. Egypt, famously, where he apparently even underwent circumcision to get in.
Really? Didn't know that.
Yeah. And his society, the Pythagorean Brotherhood, is often seen as a kind of precursor to later arcane schools, maybe even Freemasonry itself, trying to synthesize all this knowledge.
Like an ancient think tank.
Kind of, yeah, a philosophical and spiritual one.
And Eleusis. The Eleusinian mysteries are often held up as a big example, too.
Definitely central. Yorker talks about the lesser and greater mysteries with long probation periods between them.
A structured path.
Very structured. And he sees parallels with the Egyptian ritual of the dead, this emphasis on moral and spiritual readiness for the afterlife, or, for justification. Pike also stresses that inner purification was key for initiates there.
What were the rituals like? Any specific features?
Well, the temple itself at Eleusis was apparently quite symbolic, lit by just one window in the roof.
Just one.
Yeah, and it had images of the sun, moon, and Mercury. That single light source is a powerful image, isn't it?
It really is.
And Pike mentions preparatory rites using a winnowing fan, fire or torches, baptismal water, all symbolizing the soul's reformation and training.
Purging the impurities.
Exactly. Euripides and Aristophanes talked about needing clean hands and sincere speech. If you weren't considered pure, you were excluded. It really does sound like a journey of transformation.
It definitely does. Okay, so a lot of potential ancient threads weaving into this tapestry. Let's switch gears now and look at the symbolism within Freemasonry itself as these sources lay it out. The Great Lights come up a lot.
Foundational, absolutely. The Holy Bible, the square, and the compasses. Pike, especially drawing on the York Rite, calls them the very furniture of the lodge. Essential.
Meaning you can't have a lodge without them.
Pretty much, but Pike is careful to point out it's not exclusively Christian.
Right, that's an important point he makes about inclusivity.
Yeah. While the Bible is the key text in Christian lodges, he says in Hebrew lodges it's the Pentateuch, the Torah.
And the Quran in Muslim ones.
Exactly. The key is that the obligation, the oath, is taken on whatever book the candidate holds sacred. But the square and compasses, symbolically, they remain constant great lights across the border.
Okay, so what do the square and compasses mean, symbolically speaking?
Pike breaks it down quite clearly. The square, it makes right angles, deals with flat surfaces, it represents the earth, the physical body, plane geometry. It's about being grounded in the material world, in morality, in law.
Okay, the practical earthly side?
Right. Then the compasses, they draw circles, deal with spheres, spherical trigonometry. They represent the heavens, the soul, the spiritual, the intellectual realm.
The higher stuff.
Exactly. And he notes how in the first degree, the entered apprentice, both points of the compasses are under the square,
Symbolizing.
emphasizing those moral and social duties first. But he stresses it's always an interplay. The spiritual and divine are always intertwined with the earthly and human. You can't really separate them.
A balance.
Yeah.
Interesting. What about the blazing star, often shown with a letter in the middle?
Yeah, the blazing star, especially with the Hebrew letter YOD in the center, Pike describes that as representing the creative energy of God, a single point of light in the vastness.
The divine spark.
Kind of, yeah. He mentions the French Masons specifically use the YOD. Old English lectures link the star to the sun, source of light, blessings, but also an emblem of prudence or foresight.
And in Egypt.
To ancient Egyptian initiates, it symbolized Osiris, the creator, and Kabbalistically, that YOD signifies divine energy manifesting as light to create everything. So it's got layers, echoes across traditions.
Definitely multi-layered. Okay, Pike also talks about jewels in the lodge, movable and immovable. What are those about?
Right, the movable jewels are the square, the level, and the plumb. Originally called movable because they were literally passed between officers as part of their duties.
Okay.
Nowadays, they might be seen as fixed because they're always there, but the symbolism is constant. The square teaches morality, the level teaches equality, and the plumb teaches rectitude of conduct, guiding principles for life.
Makes sense. And the immovable ones.
Those are the rough ashlar, the perfect ashlar, which is like a finished cube stone, and the tracing board, or trestle board.
The ashlars sound like a metaphor for the mason himself.
Exactly. The journey from being an unrefined, rough stone to becoming a perfected, useful part of the building. Guided by the designs and lessons laid out on the tracing board, it's that shaping process, personal growth.
That's a powerful image, the stonemason analogy. Okay, another common one. The point within a circle. What's the interpretation there?
That one has a few layers, too. In the York Rite, it often represents the individual mason, the brother, contained within the proper boundaries of conduct, guided by reason, not letting prejudice or passion run wild.
Keeping yourself in check.
Pretty much. But more broadly, it can be God at the center of the universe. Pike also notes its ancient roots. It was the Egyptian hieroglyph for the sun and Osiris.
And Kabbalistically.
It's YOD again. that first spark of divine energy emanating light within the infinite space.
And the two parallel lines sometimes drawn around the circle. Pike seems a bit skeptical about the usual explanation.
Yeah, he is. The common explanation connects them to St. John the Baptist and St. John the Evangelist, with the Bible on top, which Pike sees as a later addition that kind of denaturalized the original symbol.
So what does he think they might mean? He dismisses the Tropics of Cancer and Capricorn idea too, right?
He finds that one pretty fanciful, yeah. He suggests if the lines were original, they probably had a deeper, more recondite meaning. Maybe something like the pillars Jachin and Boaz from Solomon's temple,
Oh, okay.
representing maybe the balance of forces like justice and mercy, leading to harmony under divine wisdom. Something revealed later, perhaps through Kabbalistic understanding, not obvious at first glance, it really shows how deep the symbolism can go.
It really does. Layers upon layers.
Yeah.
Now, switching to Captain Morgan's book, Mysteries of Freemasonry, we get a more, shall we say, practical look at the rituals. The preparation for the fellow craft degree sounds quite specific.
Oh, it's very detailed in Morgan's account. The candidate is basically stripped down to his shirt, given drawers to wear, his right breast is bared.
Left foot in a slipper, right foot bare.
Exactly. A rope, the cable tow, twice around the neck, and partially blindfolded or hoodwinked. It's a very deliberate state of unpreparedness, symbolically.
And then knocking at the door.
Two distinct knocks. Then there's this whole ritual dialogue. The guards inside ask who's there. The master orders an investigation.
A challenge and response.
Yes, specific reps back and forth, questions about who wants to enter, if they're already an entered apprentice, if they come willingly, if they're prepared, worthy, proficient.
Lots of checks.
And finally, the password for that degree, which Morgan gives as shibboleth, it gets whispered through the deacons to confirm the candidate is legitimate.
And the way they actually enter the lodge is symbolic too, compared to the first degree.
Absolutely. When the candidate enters, the angle of the square is pressed firmly against their bare right breast.
Ouch. Metaphorically, though.
Well, maybe literally pressed firmly, but the symbolism is key. The junior deacon explains that whereas the entered apprentice entered on the point of the compass.
Reminding them of potential pain from straying.
Right. This entry on the angle of the square teaches them to act upon the square in all their dealings, especially with fellow Masons.
Using the tools symbolically for ethics. Powerful. Morgan also includes oaths, like for the most excellent Master Mason. What kind of promises are made there?
It's a very solemn oath taken before God and the lodge. It covers things like not improperly conferring the degree on someone unqualified or outside a proper lodge.
Maintaining standard.
Right. Pledging obedience to signs and summons, upholding the constitutions of the relevant grand chapters, following the lodge's bylaws, and crucially, helping poor and deserving brethren, their widows and orphans.
Mutual support.
Big emphasis on that. And keeping a brother's secret safe when told as such, with the usual implied exceptions for serious crimes, left to conscience. And it ends with invoking a pretty severe penalty for breaking the oath. Secrecy and mutual aid are definitely recurring themes.
They really are. What about some of the higher degrees Morgan touches on? Like intimate secretary or Prince of Jerusalem?
Yeah.
Any interesting ritual details there?
For the intimate secretary opening, Morgan describes 9 specific knocks by the master. The lodge is guarded by perfect masters, and there's an invocation, Jeva, repeated by the guards while kneeling in a certain way.
Okay.
And for the Prince of Jerusalem degree, the candidate kneels and gets questioned to make sure they've fulfilled obligations from previous degrees, like Sublime Knight of Perfection. Then, before the big oath, there's a symbolic hand-washing and reciting part of Song 24, signifying purity before taking on this new level.
Definitely feels like a structured climb, step by step, with increasing responsibility.
That's exactly the sense you get. Each stage builds on the last, with deeper symbolism and commitments.
Okay, let's shift focus now to the moral and philosophical side. Leadbeater's book, The Hidden Life in Freemasonry, really emphasizes the inner aspect, doesn't it? The preparation.
Hugely. Leadbeater points out that while the external rituals matter, the inner preparation is paramount. He highlights that classic answer when a candidate is asked where they were first prepared. In my heart.
Meaning it starts internally.
Precisely. He says the rituals remind the candidate of this needing a good opinion of the order beforehand, a genuine wish to join, and crucially, a sincere desire for knowledge and self-improvement.
Which ties into the entered apprentice's goal.
Exactly. Learning to rule your passions, making progress in Masonry, which means moral progress, that inner intention, that sincerity is what gives the whole thing meaning. according to Leadbeater.
That makes a lot of sense. And Pike also links this back to the ancient mysteries, right? Especially that theme of purification.
Yes, Pike constantly draws those parallels. He talks about Eleusis again needing those clean hands and sincere speech, quoting Euripides and Aristophanes. The impure were excluded. It mirrors the moral prerequisites in Masonry.
So the goal is similar, regeneration.
That seems to be the core idea in both, a kind of spiritual regeneration, reaching a higher state intellectually and spiritually, and finding some kind of consolation, some hope, especially concerning death, like in the Proserpine mysteries he mentions.
It's amazing how these themes persist. Now, Pike also makes some pretty sharp observations about truth and lies in different kinds of societies.
He does. It's quite cynical, maybe, but perhaps realistic. He argues that while dictatorships breed lies out of fear...
You lie to survive.
Right. But democracies, he suggests, can breed falsehood through the constant chase for popularity, for office, for wealth.
Oof.
Yeah. He actually predicts that republics might see these vices, deceit, lack of integrity, grow most rankly, precisely because people prioritize getting elected or getting rich over actual merit or honesty. It's a pretty sobering take.
Very sobering, and probably still relevant. But moving to more positive teachings, how does Pike frame the Masonic view of life itself and death?
Pike paints life, even with all its difficulties, as the starting point but also the goal when seen through the lens of immortality. He calls it a lofty mount of meditation.
A vantage point.
Yeah, from which you can contemplate heaven, infinity, eternity. For the virtuous person, earthly life isn't the end, it's the beginning of their heavenly journey, part of their eternal development.
And how do you navigate the tough parts of life, according to Pike? Contentment seems key.
Absolutely central. He calls contentment a divine remedy for worldly troubles. It aligns with old moral philosophy, accepting divine providence.
It's about perspective.
Entirely. He says nobody's poor unless they think they are, and wanting more when you have plenty just shows a lack within. We basically shape our own fortune by our attitude. Cultivating patience and a noble spirit is how you endure adversity.
And death. What's the lesson there?
Death for Pike is the great teacher. It reminds us we're frail, reminds us of our duties while we're here, and stresses the importance of living a good, meaningful life.
Because the big question is,
did we live well? That's the ultimate question, at death and beyond. Life is a school, he says. Always learning, always improving. It's never too late to pursue knowledge and virtue. Continuous self-improvement seems absolutely core.
It really does. So what are some of those core duties Masonry tries to instill based on Pike?
Truth is foundational. He calls it a divine attribute, the bedrock of all virtue.
How does that play out?
Through frankness, reliability, sincerity, and justice to everyone. The dead, the absent, the innocent, those who trust you.
That's a high bar.
It is. Plus disinterestedness, acting without selfish motives, pity, compassion, humility without being weak, pride without being arrogant, and absolutely rejecting hatred and revenge.
Yeah.
These are the ideals.
And how does Masonry position itself in society?
Yeah.
Politically, religiously?
Pike describes it as promoting liberty, equality, fraternity, but within a framework of constitutional government, law, and order. Importantly, he stresses it's not a political party or a religious sect.
It's broader than that.
Much broader. It's philanthropic, recognizing our common origin, urging mutual support, tolerance, respect, and its philosophical belief in a supreme deity, soul's immortality, and reviving ancient wisdom. It welcomes people of diverse beliefs. It aims to be a positive force.
The force for good. Pike also talks about the limitations of understanding God.
Yes, he's quite clear on that. Our understanding is inherently limited because we're finite and material. We can grasp concepts like infinite space or time or the soul's spiritual nature, but fully comprehending the divine, that's beyond us.
Even God couldn't make us understand fully.
Pike suggests even omnipotence couldn't give us infinite understanding without changing our fundamental nature. It's a humbling thought, really.
It is. But within those limits, what's the purpose of the human soul?
Pike states it plainly. God created the soul for virtue. Its nature, being a spark of the divine, is geared towards goodness, balance, harmony.
So sin is unnatural.
Sin introduces misery and discord, like a poison. Virtue and purity are the soul's natural state, bringing peace and happiness. That's the goal.
And even the bad stuff that happens in life that fits in somehow.
Pike suggests God's love and goodness are present even in life's challenges. They ultimately serve a purpose, leading to a future where truth is revealed.
So difficulties lead to growth.
Exactly. Challenges lead to triumph and happiness through learning and improvement. The light in the lodge itself is a symbol of that future, clearer understanding.
Wow, deep stuff. He also touches on some more specific theological concepts, like the Word or Son.
Right, that ancient idea of an intermediary being logos, huos, sophia, wisdom created by God to act as an agent in creating humanity and the universe.
And he connects this
To figures like Ormuzd in Zoroastrianism, the Kabbalistic Ein Sof, the Gnostic demiurgos. It's this recurring idea of a bridge between the ultimate divine and creation.
He also brings up Manes, the Manichaean ideas. That's less common.
Bain's trying to synthesize Zoroastrianism, Christianity, Gnosticism. Central was a kind of pantheism. God is the cause of all, present in all. But also this dualism. Two eternal principles, good, Ormuzd, and evil, Satan. The Empire of Light was seen as emanations from the Supreme Being. It's a complex system.
Very. And Pike even gets philosophical about the nature of thought itself.
Yeah, that's fascinating. He sees thought not just as brain activity, but as an immaterial, eternal power that influences the world. The fact that thought exists suggests its immortality.
And he connects this to God.
He poses the question, is God as the immaterial soul of the universe, with infinite thought, really less comprehensible than our own thought influencing our destiny? It makes you think about consciousness itself.
And the mystery of God. His attributes aren't separate things.
Exactly. Pike says goodness, wisdom, justice aren't things God has. They're adjectives describing the one great substantive, the deity. They're necessary laws imposed by the nature of existence.
He also gives meaning to numbers 6 and 7.
6 is seen as a symbol of deity balance, health, justice. The first perfect number mathematically. 7 is almost universally sacred, probably from the 7 visible planets. It implies completeness, perfection. The Pythagoreans saw it as uniting the material and immaterial.
And how does Pike define atheism in this context?
Not just disbelief, but denying the qualities attributed to God, a mind in the universe, providence, a self-conscious cause of finite things that is powerful, wise, just, loving. He argues there has to be a plan, a purpose, otherwise our words about existence become meaningless.
Makes sense. And finally, that Kabbalistic idea of God's contraction. Semsem.
Right, Semsem.
Yeah.
This idea that God initially contracted or limited himself, creating a sort of space within infinity, not emptying, but drawing back to allow for the emanation of the 10 Sephiroth, the divine attributes, Adam, Cadman, so that created beings could have some limited cognition of God, reflecting his likeness, symbolized by the tetragrammaton, the 4-letter name.
And the fundamental law underpinning all this moral philosophy.
Justice. Pike asserts it's the fundamental law of the moral universe. Human ideas of justice change, but the principle itself is paramount. Any true understanding of God's law must align with infinite justice, even if we can't fully grasp it. A very strong statement on universal order.
Incredibly deep indeed. Okay, let's shift now to the more historical side, the evolution of Masonry. Yarker and others mention that tradition about Masons dispersing after Solomon's temple.
Yes, that's a foundational story. After the temple was built, these highly skilled artisans under Hiram Abiff supposedly spread out Syria, Mesopotamia, India, Europe, teaching their craft.
And this led to kings becoming grandmasters.
That's the tradition. Kings, princes, powerful figures became patrons and leaders, grand masters in their own lands, trying to emulate that royal art of building. It establishes a very ancient, prestigious lineage, at least in Masonic lore.
And this idea of grandmasters having significant authority seems present early on.
Definitely. The sources mention the Grand Master or his deputy having the right to enter any lodge, preside over it, even command its officers temporarily.
And the master of a specific lodge.
They had the right to convene members whenever needed, setting the time and place. If the master was absent, the senior warden usually took charge. Unless a past master was there, then authority went to them. So a clear hierarchy existed early on.
Yarker really hammers home the importance of geometry in these early schools in Masonry.
Absolutely. He quotes Plato and Proclus geometry wasn't just practical math. It was a reminder of divine concepts, a symbolic language for architects.
And still is, in a way.
Yarker points out it's still the technical language of architects today, inherited from these traditions. He argues architecture is the perfect practical training for speculative geometry, a deep link between doing and thinking.
We also hear about very old Masonic documents, like the Cook manuscript. What do these tell us?
They show the historical depth. Yarker mentions Stukely, back in the early 1700s, thought the Cook MS was already 500 years old, and the Shaw statutes from Scotland in 1598 and 1599 show actual regulations for master masons and fellow craftsmen back then.
Real rules and structure.
Yes, and rules about quality control and secrecy. The kill-winning manuscript apparently required testimony from 6 or 4 ancient men of the trade before a master could take on work.
Vouching for competence.
And rules against masters giving their mold or technical methods to non-members. Yarker cites an incident way back around 1160 related to this. Keeping trade secrets was important.
Okay, then we get to 1717, the formation of the Grand Lodge of London. That seems like a major turning point.
Yarker identifies it as hugely significant, yes, followed by some interesting events, like some members apparently burning older manuscripts.
Why would they do that?
Perhaps to create a more unified, maybe simplified narrative going forward. Hard to say for sure. But then you see the introduction of the deputy grandmaster role, suggesting growth and needing more structure.
And Dr. Stukely, the antiquarian, gets initiated around then.
In 1721. And Yarker notes Stukely firmly believed Masonry held remnants of the ancient mysteries. But interestingly, Stukely also remarked how few members there were then. Shows how much it grew later.
And there were later key moments, like royal involvement and uniting different grand lodges.
Right. Yarker mentions the Duke of Sussex becoming acting Grand Master in 1811, then Grand Master, which was key to unifying the rival Grand Lodges in England in 1813.
Creating more cohesion.
Exactly. And later, the Prince of Wales becoming Grand Master in 1875 shows that continued link to the establishment. But there were also splits, like the Grand Lodge of England eventually denying recognition to people initiated by the Grand Orient of France.
Why is that?
Because the Grand Orient dropped the requirement for belief in a supreme being. It shows these theological and philosophical debates continued to shape Masonry's structure and relationships over time.
So it's a really long, complex story. Ancient roots, maybe, evolving structures, philosophical debates.
Precisely. What we see from these sources is this fascinating mix, potential links to ancient wisdom, incredibly rich and layered symbols, strong moral teachings, and a history full of change and adaptation.
Well, that was quite the journey through these texts. To try and wrap this up, it seems the sources really highlight these strong potential connections to ancient mysteries, a deep well of symbolism drawing from all sorts of places, and this core focus on moral and philosophical ideas that seems to run through it all.
Absolutely. We've traced how these elements, ancient wisdom, ethical frameworks, the way history unfolded, weave together to suggest why Freemasonry might have had such enduring appeal and purpose.
Which brings us nicely to our final thought for you, our listeners. When you consider this complex blend, the ancient echoes, the moral compass, the historical evolution, what does it all suggest about why Freemasonry continues to exist and appeal to people today?
That's the question to ponder. And we really hope you'll dig deeper into these sources if something caught your interest. This deep dive was really just scratching the surface.
Definitely just a starting point. Thanks so much for joining us on this deep dive.